It was supposed to be just another Elvis Presley concert. Another night where the king of rock and roll, despite his exhaustion, despite the whispers about his health, would command the stage like only he could. The arena lights were bright, the band was sharp, the fans screamed with every move he made. Yet in the middle of all that noise, something happened that no one in that crowd ever forgot. Because on that night in the very front row, Priscilla Presley appeared. She didn't shout, she didn't wave, she didn't do anything dramatic, she simply smiled. And that single smile stopped Elvis Presley in his tracks. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment it was as if the thousands of fans had vanished, the band had gone silent, and the spotlight belonged only to two people, the man who had once been her husband and the woman who had once been his entire world. He forgot his words, he lost his rhythm, he kept staring. The crowd gasped, some cheered, others fell into stunned silence. They had seen Elvis falter before, but never like this. What was it about that moment? Why did Elvis, the most electrifying performer in the world, suddenly become so vulnerable, so human, just because of Priscilla's smile? To understand what unfolded that night, you need to know the story behind it. Because this wasn't just about an ex-wife sitting in the front row of a concert. This was about years of love, heartbreak, longing, and the kind of connection that doesn't disappear even when the marriage ends. Tonight we're going back to the very beginning, retracing the journey of Elvis and Priscilla to see why that smile carried the weight of an entire lifetime and why Elvis Presley simply couldn't look away. The story of Elvis and Priscilla begins long before that concert, long before the world watched a broken man falter under the weight of a single glance. To understand that front row smile, we need to go back to Germany, 1959. Elvis Presley was 24 years old and already a global superstar. The boy from Tupelo had conquered the world with his voice, his charisma, and his unapologetic rebellion, but at that moment he wasn't shaking stadiums or thrilling millions. He was stationed overseas with the US Army, serving his country like any other young man in uniform. The glamour was gone, the screaming fans far away. For Elvis, it was a strange in-between time, fame behind him, uncertainty ahead, and loneliness pressing in from every side. Enter Priscilla Beaulieu. She was just 14 years old when she first met him, living with her stepfather, an Air Force officer also stationed in Germany, a schoolgirl, a dreamer. And yet when she walked into that room at a party one evening, Elvis Presley's eyes found her. The age difference would raise eyebrows forever, but in that moment for Elvis, she was someone who saw him not as the king of rock and roll, but as a man far from home. She was quiet, shy, curious. He was captivated. Their connection was instant. Not physical, not yet romantic in the way tabloids would later sensationalize, but emotional. Elvis talked and she listened. He confided about missing his mother, about the crushing expectations that fame had left on his shoulders. She was young, but she understood. That was the beginning of something that would grow, evolve, and eventually define much of Elvis's life. By the time Elvis returned to America, the bond was strong enough that he invited her to visit. Slowly, carefully, that schoolgirl from Germany entered Elvis's world. And what a world it was: Graceland, screaming fans, recording studios, movie sets. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and for Priscilla, a whirlwind she could never have imagined. For Elvis, Priscilla was more than a companion. She was an anchor. In a life where everyone wanted something from him, money, fame, attention, she seemed to want only him. But make no mistake, their relationship was not a simple fairy tale. There was control, there was imbalance, and there were sacrifices that shaped Priscilla's life in ways she would later admit left deep scars. Still, for nearly a decade, they were inseparable. When they married in Las Vegas in 1967, the world cheered. The king had found his queen. The photos splashed across newspapers showed smiles, champagne glasses, a kiss that looked like it sealed destiny. A year later, their daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, was born. For the public, it looked like the perfect story. But behind the walls of Graceland, cracks began to show. Elvis's career was demanding, his fame suffocating. The temptations of life on the road and the women who surrounded him were endless. For Priscilla, the reality of being Mrs. Presley was far lonelier than anyone on the outside imagined. She wasn't just competing with other women, she was competing with Elvis's fame itself. And yet, through the heartbreak, the distance, the betrayals, one truth remained: Elvis and Priscilla could never fully escape each other. Their love, even when fractured, carried a strange, magnetic pull. When they finally divorced in 1973, walking out of that courthouse hand in hand, they left the world speechless. Who divorces like that, smiling, holding hands, united even in separation? That was the paradox of Elvis and Priscilla. They were done, yet never truly done. The marriage ended, but the bond remained. For Elvis, Priscilla was the one woman who had known him before the myth consumed him, the one who had seen both the boy and the king. For Priscilla, Elvis was the man who had shaped her youth, the father of her child, and a part of her soul she could never detach. Which brings us back to that concert. Imagine the weight of those years, the romance, the battles, the divorce, colliding in a single instant. Elvis standing under the lights, thousands watching. Priscilla sitting quietly in the front row. And then that smile, not the smile of a fan, not the smile of a stranger, but the smile of the one person who knew both the legend and the man. No wonder he couldn't stop starring. The year was 1976, rolling into 1977. Elvis Presley was a man at war with himself. On stage, he was still the king, the voice, the charisma, the swagger that could electrify a crowd in seconds. But off stage, the weight of years was bearing down. His health was faltering, his body bloated from medications, his spirit scarred from endless touring and an emptiness that no amount of screaming fans could fill. The divorce from Priscilla had been finalized years earlier, but the wound never fully closed. She was raising their daughter, Lisa Marie, and building a life of her own. Elvis, meanwhile, found himself drifting, surrounded by sycophants, trapped in the grind of concert after concert, and haunted by the quiet of Graceland when the lights went down. Yet no matter how far they had grown apart, Elvis and Priscilla's paths kept crossing. She would visit Graceland with Lisa Marie, share polite conversations, and remind him of the family they had built. And though the cameras caught them smiling, insiders knew the truth. Every encounter between them was loaded with memories, regrets, and the unspoken acknowledgement that their story was unfinished. As 1977 began, Elvis's shows carried an undercurrent of fragility. Fans noticed it. His voice could still soar, but there were moments where it cracked. His legs moved slower, his energy dipped, and rumors swirled that the king was unraveling. Still, the tickets sold out. Still, the crowds came. Still, Elvis Presley walked on stage night after night, determined to give everything he had left. And then came the night Priscilla showed up. She hadn't announced it. She wasn't on the posters or the programs. She slipped into the venue quietly, escorted by security, her presence causing a ripple of whispers through the front rows. Some fans recognized her instantly, the jet black hair, the unmistakable features. Others nudged their neighbors and gasped, "That's her, that Priscilla." For Elvis, the timing couldn't have been more fateful. He was already battling fatigue, already struggling to summon the old fire. Backstage before the show, he paced, fiddling with his scarves, cracking jokes with the band in a way that barely hid his nerves. His longtime friends in the Memphis Mafia noticed something different. He was distracted, lost in thought, as if something heavy was pressing on him. And then someone whispered it in his ear, "She's here." Elvis froze. He tried to brush it off with a smirk, but inside the ground shifted. Priscilla, the one person whose presence could still disarm him completely. The one who had shared his most private moments, seen him in the rawest versions of himself. Fans could adore him, the press could worship or ridicule him, but Priscilla, she knew the truth. As showtime approached, Elvis stepped out from backstage and walked into the blinding arena lights. The crowd erupted, thunderous applause, shrieks, chants of his name. For most performers, it would have been intoxicating. For Elvis, it was both a lifeline and a burden. Every cheer reminded him of the image he had to live up to, the king they demanded. But tonight, as he adjusted the microphone and began his first song, his mind wasn't on the thousands in front of him. It was searching the faces, scanning the sea of fans, looking for the one he knew was out there. And then he saw her. Front row, calm, poised, not screaming, not waving, just sitting, her eyes fixed on him. And then it happened, she smiled. The show had barely begun, but already the air shifted. Elvis tried to push forward, delivering the lyrics, strumming his guitar, flashing his trademark grin to the crowd. But inside, his focus was fractured. Every time he glanced toward the front row, there she was, Priscilla, her smile soft, knowing, almost private. The fans around her noticed too. Whispers darted through the rows, "He's looking at her. He can't take his eyes off her." And it wasn't just their imagination. The band picked up on it as well. James Burton, his guitarist, later remarked that Elvis seemed out of sync that night, missing beats, losing focus. The backup singers exchanged uncertain glances, waiting for him to catch himself. What the audience didn't know was that inside Elvis, a storm was brewing. Every lyric he sang about love, loss, or longing was suddenly sharpened by her presence. Songs he had performed 1,000 times now felt like confessions whispered directly to her. He tried to cover it with jokes, with banter, with the charm that had never failed him before. But his eyes betrayed him. Over and over they drifted back to her. Each time she returned the gaze with that quiet smile, a smile that said, "I know you," a smile that cut through the performance straight to the man behind it. The tension was unbearable. Would he acknowledge her openly? Would he break the barrier and speak to her from the stage? The crowd was watching, sensing something unusual, leaning in as if history was about to happen before their eyes. And the longer it went on, the more the suspense built. By the third song, Elvis stumbled over a lyric, a tiny mistake, but the audience caught it. Gasps rippled through the arena. For the king of rock and roll, perfection on stage was expected. A slip meant something was wrong. Elvis paused, caught himself, and smiled nervously, brushing it off with a laugh. But those closest to the stage saw it clearly. His eyes had drifted to the front row again, to her. The fans knew this wasn't an ordinary night. Something unspoken was happening. Something powerful enough to rattle Elvis Presley, a man who had faced presidents, armies of journalists, and screaming stadiums without blinking. But in front of Priscilla, he was no longer untouchable. He was vulnerable, he was human. And as the set rolled on, the tension only deepened. Each song seemed slower, more deliberate, as if he were dragging out the performance, unwilling to break the spell. The audience grew quieter, sensing the shift. They weren't just watching a concert anymore. They were witnessing a reunion, silent, charged, unscripted, between two people whose lives had been bound together in ways no one else could fully understand. The band played, the crowd waited, and Elvis kept starring. Something was about to break. The lights dimmed just enough to cast a golden glow across the stage. The audience hushed, waiting for the next song. Elvis adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and gave the crowd that familiar half-grin, the one that usually sent waves of screams echoing through the arena. But this time his eyes weren't on the crowd. They were locked on the front row. On hers. Priscilla sat there, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture calm, her face composed. And then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. Not the polite smile of a fan, not the forced smile of someone being watched. It was subtle, knowing, intimate, the kind of smile that carried years of memories, secrets, and scars. Elvis tried to begin the song. The band struck the opening chords, steady and sure, but his voice caught in his throat. He pushed forward, singing the first line, but it cracked. He blinked hard, tried again, and stumbled over the second line. The crowd shifted, murmuring in confusion. This wasn't the Elvis they were used to. The king, the man who could command a stadium with the flick of a wrist, looked undone. He turned away for a moment, pretending to adjust his scarf, buying himself a few seconds. The band kept playing, uncertain, filling the silence with extra notes. The backup singers glanced at each other nervously. Everyone on stage could feel it, something was unraveling. Then Elvis turned back, and once again his eyes found hers. This time he didn't look away, he sang directly to her. His voice, though shaky at first, grew steadier as he poured everything into the words. The song wasn't for the thousands screaming behind her. It wasn't for the cameras, the critics, or the legend. It was for Priscilla alone. Fans in the front rows began to whisper, "He's singing to her." The realization spread like electricity. People nudged each other, eyes darting between Elvis and Priscilla. The tension thickened until the entire arena seemed to be holding its breath. Elvis's face softened, his eyes shining in a way that few had ever seen from the stage. Every lyric was a confession. Every note was a plea. He wasn't just performing, he was exposing himself. Vulnerable, bare, human. And Priscilla didn't flinch, she didn't look away. She held his gaze, her smile steady, her eyes glistening with a mixture of tenderness and sorrow. For years she had seen him through countless masks, the swaggering star, the charming husband, the broken man behind closed doors. But here in this moment she saw them all at once, and he knew it. That was what shook him. Halfway through the song, Elvis's voice wavered again. He stopped, the band faltered. For a split second the arena was silent. And then came a sound no one expected. Elvis Presley laughed. It wasn't the confident, showman's laugh he usually threw into a performance. It was nervous, awkward, almost boyish. He shook his head, grinned sheepishly at the crowd, and muttered something under his breath the microphones barely caught. "Lord have mercy." The fans roared, thinking it was just another bit of Elvis charm, but those close enough knew better. He wasn't laughing at the song. He was laughing at himself, at the absurdity of being undone, once again, by the one woman who could pierce straight through his armor. He tried to restart the song, but his voice cracked again. The audience gasped, then cheered louder, willing him forward. But Elvis wasn't focused on them anymore. He leaned on the microphone stand, looked straight at Priscilla, and smiled back. It was a fragile smile laced with 1,000 unspoken words. "I remember, I regret, I still care." The crowd erupted again, feeding off the rawness of it. Some were moved to tears. Others sat stunned, realizing they were witnessing a moment no rehearsal, no script, no performance could ever create. In that instant, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, wasn't a legend. He wasn't an icon. He was a man broken open by love, exposed before the world, powerless in the face of a single smile. The band shifted into the chorus, and somehow Elvis found his footing. He sang again, this time steadier, but his delivery had changed. The power was gone, what remained was pure vulnerability. His voice cracked in places, but it only made the performance more haunting. Every note dripped with longing. Every line sounded like it was pulled straight from the depths of his heart. The audience was spellbound. Some clutched their hands to their mouths. Others cried openly. They weren't just hearing a song. They were witnessing a confession, the unraveling of a man who had spent his life on stage yet never been this nakedly honest before. By the time the song ended, Elvis stood motionless. The crowd exploded into applause, thunderous and unrelenting. But Elvis didn't bow, didn't flash his usual grin. He just stared at Priscilla one last time, his eyes saying what words could not. And then he turned away. The show continued, as shows always did. He cracked jokes, sang the next number, worked the crowd like the professional he had always been. But those who were there knew the truth. The concert had changed. The energy was different. The king had been shaken. For years afterward, fans who were in that audience would tell the story. Some swore they saw tears in his eyes. Others claimed he missed entire verses, distracted by her presence. All agreed on one thing: Elvis Presley had sung to Priscilla that night and nothing else mattered. It became one of those legendary moments whispered about by fans, analyzed in magazines, debated by insiders. Was it love? Was it longing? Was it regret? Or was it all of those things colliding in a single, unforgettable performance? No one knew exactly what was going through Elvis's mind, but everyone knew what they saw. The king of rock and roll, a man who had commanded the world's attention for 2 decades, had been stopped in his tracks. Not by illness, not by critics, not by the weight of fame, but by the smile of the woman who had once been his greatest love. It was the turning point of the night, the moment when the legend cracked, and for a fleeting instant, the man inside stepped forward. And for those who were there, it was unforgettable. The concert rolled on, but the air inside the arena was different now. The crowd had seen something raw, something unscripted, and they could feel it in their bones. Elvis Presley, the man who never let his stage mask slip, had faltered, and all because of a single smile from Priscilla in the front row. Some fans leaned in even closer, desperate to catch another glance between the two. Others whispered furiously to one another, convinced they were witnessing a private reunion disguised as a public concert. A few even cried because in that moment Elvis wasn't just an untouchable star. He was human, he was theirs. The newspapers would later call it the night Elvis lost his words, but for those in the arena, it was more than that. They felt like they had been invited into a secret, a brief window into the most private corner of Elvis's heart. Backstage, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The band members exchanged looks, half shaken, half thrilled. They had seen Elvis stumble before, a forgotten lyric here, a laugh in the middle of a song there, but this was different. This time he hadn't forgotten because of fatigue or distraction. He had been pulled into another world, one where only he and Priscilla existed. When the curtain finally dropped and the concert ended, Elvis walked off stage quieter than usual. No wide grin, no triumphant joke to the band, just a heavy silence that followed him into the dressing room. He sat down, towel draped over his shoulders, and for a long moment he said nothing. The room waited. Finally, one of his close friends tried to lighten the mood. You had them eating out of your hand tonight." But Elvis didn't laugh. He just shook his head slowly, his eyes distant, replaying the moment in his mind. "She was right there," he whispered, almost to himself. Right there. For him, it wasn't just a concert. It was an ambush of the heart. Seeing Priscilla in that front row had dragged him through every memory at once. Their first meeting in Germany, their wedding day, the birth of Lisa Marie, the fights, the silence, the divorce. It all hit him in waves, and for the first time in years, he couldn't hide it behind the mask of the king. Priscilla, meanwhile, slipped out quietly. She hadn't come to cause a scene. She hadn't come to make headlines. She had come to watch the father of her child, the man who had shaped her youth, and perhaps to remind him and herself that the bond they once shared was still alive, no matter how complicated. She didn't stop for interviews. She didn't wave to the fans. She left as quietly as she had arrived, her presence lingering like a ghost in the room Elvis had just left. But the world outside the arena wasn't quiet. Within hours, whispers spread. Fans who had been there told the story again and again, each time adding more detail, more emotion. He couldn't take his eyes off her. He forgot his words. He sang straight to her. The legend of the night began to grow before the ink even hit the newspapers. When the press picked it up, they did what they always did. They sensationalized. Headlines screamed, "Elvis still in love with Priscilla." Front row reunion stuns fans. Some speculated about reconciliation. Others painted it as a final farewell, a last spark between two people who could never truly let go. Elvis hated reading those papers, but he didn't deny the truth. To those close to him, he admitted that seeing her there had shaken him to the core. "She knows me," he told one confidant. "She knows me better than anyone. That's what gets me, she knows." The aftermath rippled beyond the media. Fans began to reinterpret his performances through the lens of that night. Every love song he sang afterward seemed directed at her. Every ballad about heartbreak felt like a confession. In living rooms across America, people debated what it meant. Was Priscilla still the love of his life? Would they find their way back to each other? Or was this the tragic beauty of Elvis Presley's story, that his greatest love would always remain just out of reach? For Elvis, the truth was heavier. That night left him raw, vulnerable, and painfully aware of the emptiness inside. He could entertain millions, but when he saw Priscilla, he remembered the one role he could never perfect: being a husband, a partner, the man she needed him to be. Back in Graceland, alone with his thoughts, Elvis would replay the moment in his mind. The spotlight, the crowd, and then that smile. It haunted him, it comforted him, it tore him apart. And though he rarely spoke of it publicly, those closest to him noticed a change. He grew quieter, more reflective in the weeks that followed. He would sit at the piano late at night, playing the old songs, his voice trailing off into silence. Fans, too, carried the memory. People who were in that arena would talk about it decades later as the night the king showed his heart. They remembered the hush that fell, the way he lost himself in her gaze, and the strange, electric silence that hung over the crowd. It wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation. And for many, it was the first time they realized that Elvis Presley, the man they worshipped, the legend they thought was untouchable, could still be undone by something as simple, as devastating as love. The consequences of that moment weren't just personal. They became part of the mythology of Elvis Presley. Just like the stories of his generosity, his temper, his music, this moment, the night Priscilla smiled and Elvis couldn't look away, became one of those touchstones fans would whisper about for generations. Some saw it as proof that he never stopped loving her, others saw it as a reminder of his humanity. But everyone agreed it was unforgettable. Because sometimes, the most legendary performances aren't the ones where the artist is flawless. They're the ones where the mask slips, the heart breaks, and the audience sees the truth. And on that night under the blinding lights in front of thousands, Elvis Presley showed the truth. In the years that followed, fans would look back on that night as more than just a concert. It became a story, a legend, a symbol of something much bigger than one man forgetting his lyrics. Because that night revealed the part of Elvis Presley the world rarely saw, the man, stripped of his crown, caught in the pull of a love he could never fully leave behind. Priscilla herself would later speak of Elvis with tenderness, even after the pain of their separation. She described him as complicated, vulnerable, and deeply human. And for those who were there in the front row that evening, her presence was proof that no matter the divorce papers, no matter the miles between their lives, Elvis still carried her inside him. That's why the moment endures. Because Elvis wasn't undone by critics or illness or even the crushing weight of fame. He was undone by something everyone in that audience understood, the sight of someone who once held your heart. Fans who were in that arena passed the story down like folklore. Parents told their children, children told their grandchildren. I was there the night Elvis looked at Priscilla and forgot the words. For them, it wasn't just a slip on stage. It was a reminder that even the king of rock and roll couldn't escape the power of love and memory. And in a way, that is why Elvis's legacy continues to live on. Not just because of the music, not just because of the movies or the jumpsuits or the myth, but because of the humanity behind it all. The boy from Tupelo who loved his mama, who rose higher than anyone thought possible, who gave the world everything he had on stage, and who, in a single glance, could still be brought back to his knees by the memory of someone he once loved. When people remember Elvis, they often remember the big moments. The first time he swiveled his hips on national television, the roaring comeback of 1968, the sold-out shows in Las Vegas. But sometimes the quieter moments say more. Like the hush that fell over a concert hall when he stopped mid-song, staring at the one woman who had shaped his life. That moment has become part of his legend not because it was polished, but because it was. It was messy, it was emotional, it was real, and that's why it matters. Because in the end, Elvis Presley wasn't just a superstar. He wasn't just the king. He was a man who loved deeply, who hurt deeply, and who carried those scars onto the stage whether he meant to or not. Priscilla's smile that night was more than an expression. It was a mirror reflecting everything he had been and everything he had lost. And Elvis's stare was more than a distraction. It was an admission that even in front of thousands, his heart could still be claimed by one person. Decades later, when fans talk about Elvis's legacy, they don't only talk about his records or his fortune. They talk about moments like this, the moments when the myth broke and the man appeared, because those are the moments that remind us why his story still matters. Elvis Presley showed us that greatness isn't just about power or perfection or never making a mistake. True greatness is about the courage to be vulnerable, even when the world is watching. That's why even now, long after that night, long after Elvis has left the building, his story continues to touch people. Because we all know what it means to be stopped in our tracks by a smile, a memory, a person we can never forget. And in Elvis, we see ourselves fragile, longing human. And maybe that's the greatest legacy of all. So when you think of Elvis Presley, don't just remember the glittering jumpsuits, the sold-out arenas, or the endless screaming fans. Remember the man on stage faltering mid-song, undone by a single glance from the front row. Remember the silence that fell, the truth that surfaced, and the way it reminded the world that even kings can be broken open by love. If this story moved you, imagine the others waiting to be told. The hidden moments, the untold truths, the pieces of Elvis's life that reveal the man behind the myth. Subscribe now and stay with me, because the next chapter of Elvis Presley's journey will take you even deeper into the moments that shaped him, the victories, the heartbreaks, and the secrets that still echo through Graceland. Because the legend of Elvis isn't just about the music. It's about the man who could stop the world with nothing more than a look. The story of that night, the night Elvis Presley lost himself in Priscilla's smile, has become more than just a memory for those who were there. It has become a symbol, a story passed down through decades, proof that legends are not made of marble or stone. They are flesh and blood, they stumble, they ache, they remember. For fans, that single moment is a reminder that Elvis Presley was not untouchable. He was a man who carried love like a wound that never fully healed. The songs he sang were not just entertainment, they were echoes of his own heart. And when Priscilla appeared in the front row, that heart cracked wide open for all to see. Historians and biographers have spent years debating what it meant. Was it longing, regret, a plea for forgiveness? Or was it simply Elvis being transported back in time to a place where he and Priscilla were young, hopeful, and unbroken? The truth is that maybe it was all of those things at once. Maybe that's why it resonates so deeply. Because it wasn't just about him and her, it was about all of us. Who hasn't been caught off guard by the sight of someone they once loved? Who hasn't felt the sting of memory so sharp it takes your breath away? That's why even today people talk about it. That night wasn't just about Elvis and Priscilla. It was about the human condition, about how love, once it takes root, never truly disappears. It changes, it bends, sometimes it breaks, but it lingers. In that sense, Elvis's gaze at Priscilla was more than personal. It was universal. It told every person in that arena and every fan who's heard the story since, even the mightiest among us can be undone by love. Priscilla, too, carried that night with her. For years after Elvis's passing, she became one of the most important guardians of his legacy. She spoke of him with honesty, never denying the struggles, never hiding the flaws, but always remembering the man beneath the crown. And perhaps in her heart, she also remembered the moment when the King of Rock and Roll couldn't look away from her smile. When people visit Graceland today, they often come searching for the legend. They want to see the mansion, the cars, the jumpsuits, the gold records, but what they often leave with is something much quieter, a sense of the man. The boy who grew up poor, the son who adored his mother, the husband who couldn't hold on, the father who loved his daughter, the lover who never truly let go. That is why Elvis's story endures, because it is not just the story of a superstar. It is the story of a man who lived, who hurt, who loved, and who, in one unforgettable moment, showed the world all of it at once. And perhaps that's the real lesson of that night, not that Elvis forgot his words, not that he stared too long, but that he reminded us of something we often forget in our own lives, that vulnerability is not weakness, it is proof of being alive. The King of Rock and Roll, who could have hidden behind bravado, chose in that instant to let the mask fall. And in doing so, he gave the world a gift far greater than a perfect performance. He gave them the truth. And that is why decades later we are still telling the story, still replaying it in our minds, still haunted by the image of Elvis under the lights, undone by a smile. So when you think of Elvis Presley, remember not just the legend, not just the king, but the man who could be stopped in his tracks by love. The man whose greatest performance may not have been flawless but human. Because that is what makes legends last, not perfection, humanity. If this story moved you, imagine what lies ahead: more untold moments, more hidden truths, more glimpses behind the curtain of the greatest performers of all time. Stay with me, subscribe, and join me as we continue to uncover the stories that reveal the man behind the myth, because Elvis's story isn't finished. Not in Memphis, not in Graceland, not in the hearts of millions who still whisper his name. The king may have left the building, but his truth, his vulnerability, and his love, those remain forever.